I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. There's a million toys at Toys R Us that I can play with. Now, whether or not you recognize that jingle from the 1980s, oh dear, we can all appreciate a little bit of the spirit of that. There is a little bit in all of us that wish we could be a kid every now and again. Wouldn't it be nice just to jettison our problems and the problems of the world for just a moment and rewind the clock, be a kid, free of worries, current concerns, and troubles? Certainly that would be awesome, but alas, you and I both know we cannot rewind the clock. Maturity should be the natural result of growing up. Our bodies, physically, should be a picture to us spiritually that as a church, we should be growing up unto maturity in Christ. Healthy bodies grow. Healthy churches grow. At last week, we began talking about the maturity that God brings to the church, how He pulls it together through the gifted people that He gives it. And I'm going to remind you of what we looked at last week in verse number 11. He gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. Well, Jesus is now seated in the heavens. He is now administrating the church on earth so that it might grow and flourish. But why all this work? Why all these gifts? What is He after? What should our church be after? Well, we find out those answers in our text today, beginning in verse number 13, where we read, "Till we all come into the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, unto a perfect man, unto the measure of the stature of the fulness of Christ, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men, and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into Him in all things, which is the head, even Christ, for whom the whole body, fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love." This really is a lovely text. Sometimes we trip over the language here, but by the end of the message, I hope to be able to help you to understand how valuable this text is, especially as concerns the health of the church. This is bigger than just you and I. I'll say more about this later, but we live in a highly individualistic society. We consider our own happiness, our own kingdom, our own car, and don't you touch it and mess my life up. But you read the New Testament, right, and it's all about the church, and you belong to a body, and you're a member that's connected to other members. In your spirituality, you are not an island unto yourself. Other people are depending on you, and you are dependent upon other people. This is essential for the health of the church. I want to go through now and give you some marks that Paul gives us of a healthy church body in this particular passage. And surprisingly, you're not going to find some things on this list that you might expect. There's nothing mentioned about how much money's in the bank. There's no mention about how many people populate the pews. There's no mention about how many programs the church happens to be running. When it comes to the health of the church, Paul had other things in mind when he was writing to the Ephesians, and I want to give those to you. Now, I want you to consider with me 3 marks of a healthy, flourishing church body. Number 1, we're going to take on the first topic in verse 13, unite all in the faith. Unite all in the faith. We might expect the word unity to appear in verse number 13 because Paul's been talking about unity for the last 2 chapters. It first came up in chapter 2. Almost all of chapter 3 is about that, and he's still talking about it in chapter number 4. He wants to unite all in the faith. Ultimately, unity centers around what? The faith. Does that catch you a little off guard today? Think about our church culture. The greater church culture, not just our church family. A lot of emphasis about unity and how do we do that? Well, don't you hear this? Doctrine, divides. Don't get all excited about your particular point, what you believe. Doctrine is divisive. Often today, doctrine is given a minimalistic approach in a lot of churches. Well, we just talk about the Bible and Jesus here. You know, and where the doctrine is dumbed down, then we put music and we pump it up a little bit louder, and that's supposed to be everybody feeling good and unified. And I want you to notice the text. Paul says, till we all come to the unity of the faith. It's important that you believe certain things, that you unite with certain people who believe those same things. It is not wrong to believe a certain way and to join yourself up to other people who believe the same way. In fact, Paul says this is a mark of spiritual maturity and of a healthy church. You ought to know what you believe. So what does he mean? What does he mean, unity of the faith? What's he after? Well, he tells us in the next line, till we all come to the unity of faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God. This is actually kind of like a bedrock of faith. I can't really believe until I first know. Faith is based on facts. If I don't know the facts about Jesus, I can't believe in Jesus. This is true about anything. I can't believe something until I know a certain amount of facts about it, all right? You might be a little bit hesitant to get in a jetliner until you know some facts about lift and wings, and if I get in it, the pilot knows what he's going to do, and he's going to get me from destination A to, or point A to destination B, and I'm going to be okay. So faith is built on knowledge, and here the knowledge is said to be the Son of God. Incidentally, if I could just come out of the message for a moment and make another little point, this passage does remind us that people cannot believe until they first know the Son of God. Did you get that? You cannot believe until you first know the Son of God. This is why missions is so important. This is why we send missionaries. We do not believe that just if people believe whatever they want, as long as they're sincere, they're going to be okay with God one day. They have to know something about the Son of God. They have to believe in Jesus. And to believe, they have to first know. So we have to go after them with the truth about God's Son. But honestly, I don't think Paul is primarily interested in the faith that saves in this particular passage. These Ephesians are already believers. They already belong to the church of God. It's impossible to please God apart from possessing Jesus as Savior. We get that. But that's only the beginning. We keep growing in the same way by adding to our faith knowledge, 2 Peter chapter 1 says. So by becoming more familiar with who Jesus is and how Jesus wants us to behave, we grow in the faith. In fact, this is what the Bible teaches in the Great Commission that Jesus gave us in Matthew chapter 28, verse 20. In addition to going and teaching all nations and baptizing them, he adds in verse 20 that we're to teach them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. We have to know the Son of God. And honestly, that takes a while. That's why the church is a teaching organization. We're a religious organization, but primarily our business is teaching Jesus' truth. With a book that's 66 books composed or compiled into one big book, it takes a lifetime, really. Actually, can I just say this? Probably take 2 lifetimes to master this book. None of us are going to get to the bottom of it in our lifetime. We all need to give more attention to it and more time to it. The problem is not that we have too much Bible in our lives. The problem today is that we don't have enough, and we don't understand enough about what Jesus expects of us. And so this is one of the reasons that God has gifted the church, verse 11, with evangelists and pastors, teachers, to make progress in knowing Christ better so that we might live in a manner that pleases Him. Maturity requires us to know a little bit more about the Son of God, and that's a lifelong endeavor. I want to call attention to the fact that I incorporated the word all into point number 1. You're going to see it in each of the main points today, and that's not accidental or just verbose and just throw another word in there to make it sound official. Actually, the emphasis here is on the whole church. Unite all the church in the faith. And then the next point, do all of this together. Again, we're just very individualistic in our thinking in Western culture. We need to kind of jettison that for the sake of the family of God and for His church. We need to do this together. We unite together. Well, I can study the Bible at home, and I listen to J. Vernon McGee, or I have this other guy I like to listen to on my podcast, and I got a whole library of books I buy. I could just do my own Bible study. I'm glad you do that. But I want you to understand the text. I want you to understand what Paul's saying. He says, till we all might come to the unity of the faith, and we have to do this together if we're going to be a healthy body. Not just on my own, at home, in my free time, practicing home church or what have you, which has become more of a thing in recent days. I want to add to this knowledge that he mentions in verse number 13. He says, under the perfect man, under the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. And I believe what he's after here is the likeness to the Son of God. He wants you to become like the perfect man under the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. So knowledge by itself is not enough. In fact, Paul warns in another place in the New Testament that knowledge does what? It puffeth up. Knowledge just for knowledge's sake or just to know another Bible verse is not enough. I need to apply that to make me more like Christ under the perfect man. Moving beyond the milk of the Word to actually enjoy the meat of the Word, and I actually begin growing and looking like Christ. The text says, under the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. The word stature can refer to size, but it also can refer to age. And here, apparently, it's referring to how long we've known the Lord or how much evidence of growth. And we've already been talking, the missionary and I, how our kids have changed since the last time we saw each other. They have physically, in their stature, have grown. They measure more, right? And the rest of us, we haven't changed in stature. We've just aged. Hopefully well. So we're aging, right? And so that's the idea here. The measure of the stature, or aging into the fullness of Christ. So Christ is seen in me. To give you another graphic picture of this, remember that wall or that door jamb in which your parents marked your progress as a child. And maybe you did this with your own kids. You had a little spot in the house, and each birthday or whatever you did it, you marked it and you saw the progress of the kids. But no matter how much progress the kid made, Dad and Mom were always taller. Until eventually the kids were as tall as Dad and Mom, or nearly so as tall as Dad and Mom. They had caught up. And if you could picture that in your mind, the ultimate goal is full maturity in Christ. It's just to be just as tall and just as lovely and just as kind as Jesus is. And I'm continuing to grow. And maybe I'm not where I'd like to be yet, but I'm making progress. I have moved up on the chart a little bit. I am not going to stay the way I was. I am moving forward, and eventually I want the image and the likeness of Christ to be seen in me. That's the stature I'm after. What if I were as patient as He when I'm under attack? What if I was as tender as He with a little child who was pulling on my sleeve? What if I were as prayerful as He when faced with monumental pressures? What if I were as understanding as He when people let me down? Measuring ourselves against Christ, we all fall short. All have room for growth, because none of us is fully like Jesus yet. Till we all come to the unity of the faith. What's that involved? The knowledge of the Son of God, but ultimately the measure, the stature, the fullness of Christ, or the likeness to Jesus Christ. Would you believe there are some people who believe you can reach sinless perfection in this life? That you can be 100% like Jesus in character. Well, look back at verse 13. You're looking at it in the text. I don't know if it's on the screen, but in verse number 13 it says, unto the perfect man. There it is. Till we all come to the unity of the faith, unto the perfect man. Incidentally, I don't believe perfect means that there. It means full stature or reaching adult status with the Lord. But some people do believe that you can reach this status. Unfortunately, they're going to have a problem with the person who wrote this book. His name is Paul. And he wrote another 13 letters in the New Testament. And he would be the first to say, I ain't there yet. In fact, he mentions in Philippians 3 and verse 12, not as though I had already attained. I haven't arrived. Either we're already perfect. That's his words. I follow after that I may apprehend that for which I am apprehended of Christ. I follow after. I'm trying to apprehend more in Christ. I'm trying to make progress, but I'm not perfect. That's the Bible answer to that question. None of us reach sinless perfection in this life. It is the goal. I'm after it, but none of us ever arrive. I've completed the first point, and I'm ready for point number 2. What are marks of a healthy church? One is that we're all united in faith, both in our knowledge and how we appear. Number 2, we're save all of us from being children. And this is verse number 14 of our text, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro, carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness, whereby they lie in wait to deceive. So another mark of maturity is when we stop acting like kids. Paul uses 2 word pictures to help us to see the vulnerability or the gullibility of children. Now, I know you've never done this with your kids, right? But sometimes I was a little ornery with my own. You know, when they're little tykes and they look up at you at 3.5 and, Daddy, why does such and such do such and such? How does that work? And you know, as a parent, you have great liberty at that time. You may not know yourself how anything works, but you can spin a yarn. You can tell a tale. And you can tell them there are pink elephants or pigs that fly, and they will believe you. Or like the kid, the older kid, he was talking to his younger brother. There was only one banana left in the house, and the older brother really wanted it. And when the banana was opened, the older brother said, look, you see those little dark lines that run down into the middle of this banana? Those are moldy spider legs. You would never want to eat that. And so the older brother took the banana and finished it up. When the little boy went to see his mother later, the older boy got in trouble. But you can spin a yarn and a kid will believe you. Children are easily led astray. Mark of maturity, though, is when the children of God aren't easily upset or disturbed by false teachers who seek to lead people astray. Every Christian needs to know the faith well. The church needs to know its faith well so it's not led astray. And he gives 2 word pictures. I mentioned these already. The first one is tossed to and fro. The root of the verb here comes from a noun that means waves. It's like a little bark that's out on the ocean being flopped and tossed around by the waves. It's out of control because something else is controlling it. The waves are pushing the thing around. And this is what a false teacher or false doctrine does. It unsettles, it disturbs your stability and knocks you off course. Alongside that, he mentions carried about with every wind. We know, of course, right, that wind and waves can create a lot of havoc. My family understands this after driving through northeastern Oklahoma in tornado season. Strong winds are destructive forces. And this is a fitting picture of a false teacher or false doctrine because it's like the false teachers suck up like big windbags and spew out all this air that pushed God's people off course. And this happens. Good, godly people that sit in churches just like this get mixed into some kind of Bible study or somebody comes, knocks on their door and gets them talked into going somewhere else. And the Bible picture here is that if I know my doctrine, if I'm united in my faith, I'm going to be saved from being a child who is swept up into this and pushed off course into some destructive form of teaching. So together with the help of the gifted men of verse 11, apostles and prophets and pastors and teachers, we can be better able as a church to weather the storms and remain true to the Lord and not get blown off course. It's a very picturesque verse. Verse 14 also mentions the sleight of men. The word sleight is related to a word that means dice playing. Refers to those who know what they're doing with the dice and play tricks with it to get it to come out the way they want. They're playing with you. Now, we praise magicians for sleight of hand, but we don't want people doing that on purpose when we don't know about it, directing us off course. In addition to that, he mentions deception here. These are all various metaphors or pictures of what a false teacher does. Deceives comes from, can I use the Greek here? Planes, from which we get our word planet. And planets were known at one time as the wandering stars because they would light up and they would move and they weren't always in the same place. They're wandering stars. And so in that way, these deceive us or they cause us to wander off course. That's what the passage is saying. So how am I going to be saved from being a child? I'm not going to be blown off course. This is a mark of maturity. I'm going to be stuck on the truth and not led astray. I know that some people would say to this, this would never happen to me. I'm smarter than that. I would not fall for it. Let a man that thinks he stands do what? Take heed lest he fall. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse number 12. Truth be told, given the right circumstances, any good Christian can fall for a yarn, a well-choreographed lie, and a false Christ. So what keeps us from falling and losing our way? Let me give you a couple things here. How do we keep our way? First, I just want to give credit to God. Grace. Grace is supernatural enabling. The fact that you're still on course, that you haven't fallen for a lie, that you're still following Jesus Christ today is a sign of grace, not your wisdom, not your smarts, or how strong you are, or that you can spot a lie a mile away. We want to give God credit, right? It's grace that keeps us on course. Part of that, though, is also training. I need to be in the Word. I need to be with God's people because the more I know my faith, the less likely I'm going to be blown off course. I need to be interconnected with other believers and the truth that we hold together. I used to live in Northern California. One of the things that Northern California is known for are these giant sequoias. You ever seen them? Maybe you've seen pictures of them. There's a picture here of the Mariposa Grove, which lies at the south of the National Park, Yosemite. These trees are massive, so massive we did drive a car, actually a minivan, through one of these one time with our kiddos inside. But these mighty trees have relatively short root systems compared to the size of them. And when we went to the Mariposa Grove or a redwood grove, we went to a group of trees called a grove. They don't grow in isolation very well because strong winds can knock them over. You know how they make it? Their roots are all connected to each other. They go and intertwine with one another. So the bulk of one tree holds up the bulk of the other tree. And they don't fall down because they're interconnected. Their roots are wrapped around each other. And my friend, this is the secret to your own strength. Do you want to stand up in the storm? The waves and the wind, Jesus said, would blow in Matthew chapter 7. But he who's founded upon a rock will stand. You need to be intertwined with other believers so you don't fall over. And we saw sequoias, even in this grove, fallen over. And I mean, even fallen over, they were still higher than our heads, and they had these massive networks of roots sticking up out of the ground, but no longer interconnected, and they fell over. What God intends for the church then is for us to be interconnected so we stand strong and we're not thrown off course. Now think about your relationships for a moment in the church. Are you kind of a Sunday once and done? I get in, punch my time card, did church thing, now I'm on my way. Or are you actively thinking about your connection to the church, of being interconnected with other believers? I'm asking. You decide. I just told you this is what the text is teaching. I got to be interconnected with other believers or I could get blown off course. So what are you doing to connect? Do you get with other members outside the church? Not just on Sunday, but other days during the week? Do you attend a Bible study? Small group? Do you meet with others for prayer? How about for breakfast? Have you gone out with anybody in the church recently for breakfast? Have you gone over to their house just to sip a cup of tea? Maybe you just joined each other for the big game. There's nothing wrong with that either. You're building camaraderie and connection. We need each other. We need this connection so that we don't end up being kids blown off course. Marks of maturity: 1, uniting all in the faith. Number 2, saving all from being children. I think we're ready for number 3. It's in verse number 15. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things. So the final point is grow up all, should have put into Christ. Grow up all into Christ. We read about this, as I mentioned, Ephesians 4, verses 15 and 16. Verse 16 reads, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body unto the edifying of itself in love. So how do I avoid being a child? Well, I got to be interconnected. I got to know my faith. But Paul would add to that here that we need to be speaking the truth in love. The whole passage, incidentally, is really centered around the truth. The first point was what? In the faith. Second point, don't want to be blown away from the truth as a child who's gullible. Third point, I want to grow up by speaking the truth in love. Interesting emphasis on truth in this passage, but it's also sentineled with another word that I need to call your attention to. Look at the beginning of verse 15 again. But speaking the truth how? In love. Look at the end of verse number 16. Last phrase, unto the edifying of itself in love. There is an interesting interplay between truth and love. If you know your Old Testament, God often says his sentinel or key characteristics are what? Mercy and truth. Mercy and truth. Mercy often represented by the Old Testament word for love. So love and truth, characteristics of God, need to be characteristics of us. Truth and love bind the church together, make us more God-like. That's all I can do, kind of hint at that and move on today. But speak the truth in love, edify the church itself in love. Love is the aroma of the Christian life. Pastor John Stott, some of you will know that name, he said, truth becomes hard if it's not softened by love, and love becomes soft if it's not strengthened by truth. Maturity is keeping the two in balance, truth and love, speaking the truth and love. How we need this in the church. It's not enough to be right. You also have to be loving in the way you speak and think and treat others. Because it's really easy and it happens all the time. Sometimes we don't even intend it. We crush others by our words. How we need it in our homes. It's not enough to make your point and walk out the room or slam the door. We must work on communicating our words in such a way that the ones we love most don't miss the love in what we're trying to say. We could probably park there for a while. We ought to memorize as a church, verse 15. But speaking the truth in love may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. Two thoughts here to sum up verses 15 and 16. What's he after? What's this idea of growing up all into Christ? Well, there is a joining or connectedness to the head. And here we're told the head is Christ. No question. He is the command and control center, not just of my life, but of the whole church. He is in charge. We are connected to Him. John uses the metaphor in John chapter 15. He is the vine and we are the branches. We get all of our growth and sustaining strength from the head. Can I just ask you to park for a moment here? Because the way the Bible words it, you can just easily just pass on and just really not grasp it. So I want you to pause. And I want you to do some meditation and thinking about this for just a moment. The church is connected to the head. But the way the passage is set up, the idea is each person is directly connected to the head. And you know this when you understand your body, right? You stub your toe at night, and there's a message runs all the way up from that little toe, all the way up to the head. Every member is connected directly to the head, and we get our sustaining strength from the head. It's His life flowing. All of my life is about Him. I would not be here if He had not chosen life for Mike Gradwell. I'm going to put him right in the family of John and Ruth back there in Pennsylvania. God gave me life. God gave me spiritual life when He saved me. All life comes from Him, and my ability to live the Christian life continues to flow from the head to me, or I'd stop living. You cut the head off of anything, and it does not live, right? I need the head in order to live. Some of you are thinking, but I don't even know where to begin with this. I don't know if I really understand this connection. Let me just say it begins by understanding that He is the head. I'm already connected to Him. It's by understanding that He is right here, right now in this room. He'll be in my car when I leave this place this afternoon. He's going to show up at work with me on Monday morning. He is going to be with me if I drive out of town someplace else this week, because wherever I go, He goes. I am connected to the head. I have His life in me. So being connected means I can consult with Him, chat with Him, check in with Him every single day as many times as I want. And sometimes I do that many times a day. God, I need help now. Oh, God, I'm right in the middle of this. I don't know what to say. They expect me to be the pastor and have the answers to everything, and I don't, but you do. Help me, please. I'm connected to the head, and I expect the head to infuse into me what I need at the moment, and that is the Christian life. I believe that God is working through me and He's working through you all the time because the head is flowing through you. That's important. Why is it important? Because of the next part. In verse number 16, he says that we would be joined together, compacted by that which every joint supplieth. And you're like, huh? Well, if you're connected to the head and the life of the head is flowing down through you, that means when you touch me, some of the head is pumping life through you to me. There's a grandness, there's a bigger, this isn't just about me getting life. This is about me receiving the life of God through you and your ministry to me. We talked about that last week, the gifted men in the church. So I'm joined to one another. Verse 16 mentions those various ways, joined together, compacted. The word compacted means united together or coalescing by the effectual working in the measure of every part. Every part has a role to play. That part isn't just ministering in the church, it's bringing lifeblood from the head through your giftedness to the rest of the body. So when a believer serves his role, it connects us to each other and ultimately helps us to receive life from the head just as we need. We really do, as I said last week, what? Need each other. I don't know if it's just me, but something's not working with the AC very well today, I don't think. But I'm almost done. You're doing a good job staying awake. I'd have been sleeping by now. The original word for compacted in verse 16 sounds a lot like symbiosis. In fact, the Greek has the syn, sin prefix on the word. Symbiosis is a relationship in which two organisms are dependent on each other for survival. There are many examples of this in science, which shows the harmony of nature and how God made everything to work together. I want to give you just one example, and then I'm through today. So we're going to talk about Nemo. You'll remember that from the movie Finding Nemo, but the clownfish hangs out in anemones because anemones have these stinging tentacles. And the tentacles protect the clownfish from its predators. But anemones have predators too, and they need the clownfish to protect them from their predators. So the symbiosis they're working together, and the clownfish have this unusual enzyme or mucus that comes out onto their skin, scales, thanks, that keeps them from feeling the sting of the anemone. Perfectly designed for the habitat in which God chose for it to live. Again, I'm going to come back to where I started. In our highly individualistic culture, we need to revitalize symbiosis in the church. We survive and thrive when we allow the head to supply what we need through the other people he places around me. Your growth, maturity, the health of this body would not be possible apart from a healthy church family. Paul's after this. We're united together for these purposes. We need each other to remain strong, healthy, mature Christians. I've hinted at it through the message today. Are you connected the way you need to be? Is God not talking to you about making some changes? Some of us need to get into one of the small group studies or attend an additional service or a Bible study. Some of us need to make a point of connecting. And you do that, one of the ways you do that is by getting together with brothers and sisters in Christ throughout the week. If that's not a regular part of your life, I want to encourage you to begin making that a part. Not because I'm trying to sell a program, but because I'm trying to sell your personal growth and the health of this church. May God help us. Father in heaven, thank you